the least amount of money we can pay workers? Well, according to legislators, the most that can be spared is $7.25 an hour. While some may argue that the minimum wage should not be raised, I believe that is not enough for those with bills to pay and mouths to feed. Minimum wage laws have been around since the 19th century and created to make sure that everyone had enough money to live off of. However, in the 21st century, these laws hurt more than help due to inflation rates and as prices go up as the years go on. I want to persuade you that the minimum wage should be raised. We will discuss the history of minimum wage, the effect it has on poverty, how the top 1% controls the wealth, and concessions of those who believe that it should not be raised and those who believe that the country will go broke because of it. I come from a poor family and have even made minimum wage myself and know that this cannot be enough. The minimum wage should be raised because it is no longer enough to pay for these increased prices. Minimum wage laws were established to make sure that Americans were making enough money to survive. These laws were supported by Americans because they felt that it would be in their best benefit. Little did they know, these laws would leave them with empty pockets in the future. Charles Scaliger, a writer hoping for a new country, states, "It was not until the Great Depression that the first attempt was made to establish a federal minimum wage. In 1933, the Roosevelt administration made 25 cents per hour the national minimum wage as part of the National Recovery Act. Once the country had hit a low economically, Roosevelt felt that the best course of action was to make sure his citizens were covered. He wanted them to be able to provide for themselves and for their family. However, in today's society, minimum wage laws have gotten pushed to the side. Slowly but surely, America has become a primarily capitalistic country focused on the upper class instead of those struggling in the lower classes. In the 19th century, the minimum wage was increased gradually as the years went on. The wage was put on halt in 2009 and was raised the last time to $7.25. For 12 years, the wage has stayed the same rate, even though the rate of inflation is on a constant climb. America is known to have money problems, and poverty is not an unknown issue. With the minimum wage being so low, it is not providing enough for employees to sustain themselves. With prices rising, it takes more to be able to pay for basic necessities such as food, clothing, and shelter. This leaves more people poor, unhappy, and even homeless. If someone was to work 40 hours a week with minimum wage, they would only be making about $1,000 a month. Rent and other bills would take up most of the money, and that leaves about $100 for food. So are people supposed to work 7 days a week for a mere amount of money that is barely enough to live off of? It is inhumane and often leaves people strapped for cash and under severe amounts of stress. People should not be discussing the minimal amount of money that workers should be paid, but instead the maximum amount. The streets are flooding with homeless people and are unable to find affordable housing with the little money that they can make. Minimum wage workers make about $12,000 a year. How are they to provide for themselves and possibly their family? Sure, minimum wage might be enough for a part-time high school student, but for adults that have more responsibilities and expenses, it is simply not enough. If the wage was raised, there would be less poverty and stress all around. The problem with America is that the top 1% controls the wealth. There are millionaires and billionaires resting in their expensive houses, while the rest are forced to live in despair. CEOs make triple what they pay their workers, and that just doesn't sit right. There should be a way to share the wealth to the hardworking employees that make the companies possible and running. According to the article by Gale in Context, between 2009 and 2012, the incomes of the top 1% grew by 30%, while those in the bottom 99% increased by only 0.5%. The top people are getting paid more and more, while the bottom people are getting paid less and less. The top percent already are already much more wealthier than the rest, yet they are still receiving more money than those that are struggling to get by. If most of America's population is in a lower percentage, then actions must be taken in order to aid them to make more money. Not everyone is blessed with a rich family or an enticing singing voice, so how are they to live? In poverty and despair, forced to work their lives away for a tiny paycheck. If the focus was taken away from the rich and instead focused on the poor, America would have a much more even distribution of wealth and a lot more satisfied citizens. Some may argue that the wage is acceptable where it is at, but it is not true. Citizens are working tirelessly to make barely enough to live off of. If the wage was increased, companies would have to increase the amount of money they pay employees make hourly, and that is why the minimum wage has been put on hold. Companies are against the raise because they don't want to have to pay more for usually unskilled workers. In fast food restaurants, most employees apply with zero experience and earn it on the job. Professor of economics Joyce Riesmans argues that there will simply no longer be room in the economic system for the employment of minimally educated, low-skilled people. However, a good deal of the population are these unskilled workers, and eventually companies will have to hire them. Employees in fast food or retail do hard work behind the scenes. They do not deserve to be paid so little. It is simply immoral. Citizens have been fighting for a higher wage for some time now, and no longer can work like slaves, getting the bare minimum while CEOs get millions. Jeff Strzok, a labor historian, says the rallying cry of fast food and retail workers in recent years has been $15 in a union. Because they are organized and can bargain with their employees, union workers on average earn higher wages and have greater benefits than their non-union counterparts. Employees are able to take matters into their own hands when they form a union against their employers. It is important as citizens that we fight for what is right. America is a democracy that is run by the people and for the people. It is time that the people fought back. Many are concerned with the minimum wage raise because they worry that the country will be broke. Some states might not be able to afford a raise while others can. A simple solution to this is to raise the wage to different amounts depending on the state. Instead of making an overall federal law, I feel that it would be most beneficial if individual state governments were able to decide how much to raise. Since not all states are the same size or have the same population, it wouldn't make sense for workers in California to be making $15 an hour and workers in a smaller state like Kansas to be making the same. The wage should be determined by the state so that these minimum wage laws are being enforced in the most efficient way. Some states have already implemented a higher wage for their workers, but there is still a large amount of states that remain at $7.25. The minimum wage law needs to be updated. In the past, it was on a steady climb, rising with inflation. However, the climb has stopped since 2009, leaving the wage at $7.25. While some states have adopted a new wage, there are still many left to follow. Citizens should not have to work their lives away for such a minuscule amount of money. The biggest problem in America is stress about money. There is always bills to be paid, and families to take care of. It is important that citizens are able to have enough money for their expenses, because nothing in this world is free. If the wage was raised to $15, the lower class has a better chance of being successful and carefree, and the upper class will no longer control all the wealth. It is time for everyone to be able to make a living wage.